making, mental capacity perspective. And those have been the big movements. The ones that we didn't talk that much about are the biological psychologies and what it has actually told us about human beings. And it has been, at least in the last about 30, 40 years, that we have been scanning the human brain to really try to determine, how the brain operates, what occurs inside the mind when we're engaged in certain activities. Okay. And to kind of start this lecture on social psychology, the thing that we have learned over the last 30 years is that human beings are social beings. We're more closely related to a colony of ants than we are to a pack of wolves or a lone bear or a species like that. Because every time we scan the brain, let me put it in this perspective. Your frontal cortex, which is the most well-developed part of the brain in a human being, if we were to flatten it out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, just a regular piece of paper, and we were to say how much of this frontal cortical area is dedicated to things like logic, solving math problems, um, uh, doing an engineering problem, stuff like that. If you put a quarter on that 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, that's how much of area of your frontal cortical area is engaged when you're doing logic thinking like that. And this really baffled neuroscientists in the beginning because because it was always assumed that the frontal cortical area of the brain was largely developed to allow us to do abstract logic thinking that has built our world as it is. But it's actually only about a quarter of your frontal cortical area that is dedicated to that if we were to squish it out. The rest of your brain is dedicated to that frontal area is dedicated to social thinking, to identity, and your identity as a human being, not as an individual, where you belong in your social world. In fact, this area of the brain is so complex, it's also called the default network. Because when you're not engaged in doing math problems or solving some logic problem, your brain instantly turns on this area of the brain. When we're not when we think we're not thinking, we're thinking about other people. We're thinking about our social relationships. And in some research, this default network takes less than a second to turn on once you stop thinking about a math problem. And we measure this. So the one way we do this is we measure the electrical activity in the frontal lobe to see where that electricity is going. I'm not thinking right. And we can tell you to stop a math problem and start again within a second, and that default network automatically turns on. Okay. And so what we have learned over the last 30, 40 years is that human beings are very much a social being. And we can even talk about synchrony of a brain. All right. And I'll kind of engage you in this kind of conversation. You know that you want to go into psychology when you go and you do people watching. And one favorite place for me to go do people watching, because when I first started in psychology, I very much was interested in human relationships because one of my first professional jobs was in the field of relationship violence. And so I've always been very interested in interaction of two people who may or may not fall in love. And so if you are a people watcher, one of the most favorite places to watch people are in restaurants, especially when you know that this is their first date. Okay. Because it's very easy to predict if there's going to be a second date because we start to do what's called a relationship dance. Our brains actually become synced with each other if you're going to be in love with someone. And the way you can notice this is a couple A over here, they're not jiving with each other, so they're kind of avoiding each other, da da da. But the couple B, who is, there's going to be a second date, by the end of their dinner, they will start to parrot each other, meaning that they will start lifting their fork the same way, they will drink the same time, their feet will be parroted towards each other, they will mimic each other's behaviors. And it's kind of fun to watch. So I encourage you, if you go to a restaurant, kind of pick out those people who are dating. If they're parroting each other by the end, they're stuck with each other. Why is that? Because we didn't really talk about this in developmental psychology, but human beings around 24 to 36 months of age develop something called theory of mind. Okay. Theory of mind is when you come to the realization that you are an individual, you recognize yourself. And at that same time, you recognize that other people are individuals in themselves. And you theorize why they're happy or why they're sad. So it's when a little child maybe is really happy and the little child sees his brother crying. We'll just use that as an example. Before 24 to 36 months, the child has why is that other child behaving differently than me? It doesn't make sense to them. But at 24 to 36 months is when you see things like empathetic approach, where the sibling will go to the other sibling and calm them if they're sad or angry, even though they're not. Okay. And I'm going to take you through some very simple tasks about theory of mind that, again, start to develop at 24. These tasks can become more and more complex, but I just kind of want to kind of rehearse the more simple versions. Self-recognition. I'm using this as an example because it's one of the ways we can test whether or not animals have theory of mind. Okay. So before a baby goes to takes a nap, you put the mirror in front of them and they look at the mirror and, oh, there I am, da 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 da. And then the baby goes to sleep and you put an odorless little red dot on their head. Let's say the forehead. And when the baby wakes up, you put the mirror in front of them. If they have self recognition, they'll go to that red dot and they'll try and wipe it off. Why? What is that doing here now? And that's one of the tests of self recognition. I bring this one up because we can do this cross species. So we know dolphins have self recognition, elephants have self recognition, our other primate cousins have self recognition. I'm sorry, for the pet lovers, your pet bird, dog, cat, they could care less whether they have a red dye on their head or not. So, uh, so for the pet lovers, I'm sorry, that so far we don't have evidence of self-recognition in them. Now, with that, then we have to recognize that other people have experiences that we don't. Okay, so I'm going to take you through the simplest example of this. Let's say we have two cups and we have two children. And in front of both the children, we put a ball in cup, let's do this cup A. and then we have cup B. And then we have one of the children leave the room. And in front of child A, we take the ball out of cup A and put it in cup B. And we ask the child, when the other child returns, which cup should they look in to find the ball? Okay. Before 24 to 36 months of age, most of the children will incorrectly say cup B because that was their experience. But a child who has a fully developed theory of mind will say, well, when he or she was in here, it was in cup A. So when that child returns, even though it's in cup B, they should look in cup A because that was their experience. And they start to recognize, they start to theorize based upon another person's experience instead of their own. Okay. And so this is the other kind of, this is very, there's like 16 of these tests that vary in complexity and whatnot. But most humans between the age of 24 to 36 months develop these capabilities. Okay. And it really has to do with some neurological things that are going on in the brain. The first one is what is called mirror neuroning. Okay. Mirror neuroning is when you're paying such close attention to someone else, their physical experiences in their brain mirror in your brain, meaning that both of your brains are synced. And the same neurons that are firing in their head are firing in your head. If you ever want to test this, so if you're at a movie theater and you're kind of like bored with the movie, and it's an action scene and they're driving, and someone shoots and everyone dodges to the right, or when the plane veers to the left, everyone leans to the left. Okay. When 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 um, when this is happening, when we've tested this, is the neurons that were firing in that stunt person's head when they originally did those action stunts actually start to fire in the movie watcher's head. Same neurons. Okay. So we have this capacity of mirror neuroning. We have this capacity of mirror neuroning. And and uh, and so that's the first part, but it's a motor reproduction. Okay. Behind our mirror neuroning system, we have what's called the mentalizing system. The mentalizing system is when you determine the emotional state they're in, and your brain will fire those neural, emotional, mental reactions in your brain so you know what they feel, what they're feeling. This is the basis of empathy. Okay. And now I'm going to say we're all on a different level of this mirror neuroning, mentalizing system, theory of mind. Some people have a weak theory of mind. Some other people, sometimes they're called empaths. They feel everything. They have a very strong theory of mind system and mirror neuroning system and mentalizing system. So we're all different on this, but all but a few people have the system. There's two groups of people that seem to not have either of these systems. Okay. The first one is psychopathic serial killers. Okay. For some reason, even as adults, psychopaths fail theory of mind tasks, even the red dot task. They fail it completely. And that's why it's believed that they see people as objects to consume instead of being able to theorize about their emotional, physical state that is different from theirs. They're basically stuck at a 24-month age as far as mentalizing about other people. Okay. The other group, which again, we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the abnormal section, is children with autism tend to do very poorly at theory of mind tasks. And this is what's been now called, my goodness, the broken mirror theory of autism, where these children don't have that ability to mirror neuron and whatnot with other individuals. The reason why that the reason why that hasn't been used as a complete explanation of autism is only around 78%. No, I shouldn't say only, but about 78% of autistic children fail theory of mind tasks. That leaves 23% of children with autism who pass these tasks just fine. So if it was just a broken mirror issue with autism, you would expect at least 99% to fail at these tasks, but only about 78% do. So that's kind of where, and we'll get to a better explanation of autism when we get to the abnormal section. But just so you know, the types of individuals that don't pass these theory of mind tasks tend to be individuals who have severe social deficits, such as what we see in autism and psychopathology. And I do want to make this very clear. Psychopaths are not autistic, and autistic children aren't psychopaths. They're two different humans. They're two different individuals. I just wanted to put that out because sometimes when I talk about this, people start to say, well, are psychopaths just autistic people that we can treat? You cannot treat psychopathology. And most women who have been in a relationship with a severe narcissist psychopath know this. Just as an example. Okay. Anyways, so let's move on. So, so, so one, does anybody have any questions before we move on? You can put it in the chat. You can unmute yourself. Does anyone have any questions about kind of where we're headed with this whole social psychology thing? All right. All right. Thank you, Michael and Teddy. All right. Okay. So just to give it a little bit of a definition after my explanation, so social psychology is a scientific. The reason why it's important to say scientific in this is that social psychology has always been grounded in the scientific approach. And that's also part of, I think, its downfall as well. Okay. But I'll get to that in just a minute, but I'll explain that a little bit. Anyways, it's a scientific attempt to explain how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of individuals are influenced by actual, imagined, or implied presence of other human beings. Okay. Whereas when we talk about general psychology, it's scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. Social psychologist wants to know, what about the human element? What is it about the presence or implied presence of others that guide our behavior? Now, you might be asking, actual, imagined, or implied presence. I want you to think about let's say it's 2 a.m. At night, and you come to a stoplight, and there's absolutely no cars anywhere, nothing anywhere. How many of us wait for the light to turn green still? I'm willing to bet almost everyone in the class is probably raising their hand and go, yeah, yeah. That's the imagined or implied presence of other people. Even when others are not around, we will conform to a behavior, a social norm, even if no one is watching, because we think someone is watching. Okay. Um, Probably another example of this is with moral behavior. Okay. And this is a good example of priming. So go on this research with me. What a professor did, or a researcher did, is at the beginning of the semester, he gave a paper and pencil measure of moral fortitude, meaning, are you think yourself as a highly moral person and your behaviors are guided by your moral fortitude or your moral attitude, whether comes from religion, whether it comes from whatever. How grounded are you in your moral behavior? Okay. Then he disconnected this and invited these people back for something called a totally unrelated research activity. Okay. In and then he randomly divided them into two groups. Group one, they first read something about someone doing a good moral deed. In the second group, they read like a passage out of Moby Dick, something unrelated with morals or moral fortitude or whatever. Okay. And then they were said, okay, then they were given a bogus paper and pencil thing. But then they were asked, hey, can you stay for this other research? So they thought that book and now what they're going to engage into are two separate things. In the next research, they were given the chance to get money through playing a video game, but they were asked to look at the video screen and the score the video screen came, but keep their own tally, their own tally. And in it, no matter what, the person would always paper tally more points than what the computer would show. No matter how bad the person was at the game, the computer score was always going to be less than the paper score. Now, for your points, for your so in the research, the idea is for the number of points you got dollars. So let's say you got 30 points, you got $30. But let's say the computer said 20. If you do give the computer score, you only get $20. And so the moral question is the person honest and said there's a discrepancy? Or does the person lie and say, yes, my paper score, computer score was the higher score? Okay. In this situation, irregardless of a person's mental moral fortitude, if they were in group two when they just read some nonsense thing, the majority of the people cheated, whether they measured low or they measured high on moral fortitude. The group where they read a story about someone doing something morally correct, they didn't cheat as much, regardless of moral fortitude. Even the people who measured low in moral fortitude didn't cheat. So this is what's meant about the presence, or what we call priming effect, of experiences with others. That if you want someone to do moral behaviors, you make sure that they've experienced moral behaviors beforehand. It's called priming effects. This was done by Carter, 2018, if anyone wants to know. But this is also, so some anthropologists have suggested this is why people who are into religion have pictures of Jesus Christ. This is maybe the reason why the Catholic religion or other religions do the cross, the necklace. why we do all of these symbolic things, because theoretically we have to be reminded to be moral human beings. And we'll get into some more research here in a little while, known as the Milgram studies, that when that is left and you're forced into something, you can do things that are really despicable to other human beings. But we'll get into that here in just a few minutes. Um, so this is where we're at. I think there was one other research I wanted to show dealing with morality and everything, and it's called the Good Samaritan experiments. They were done in the 60s, repeated in the 80s, and again in the 2000s. But they're called the Good Samaritan research, and I'm going to kind of rehearse the original Good Samaritan research. So we have individuals. Let's say we have building right here. And clear across campus, where we have our Good Samaritan right here. What we want the Good Samaritan to do is to go and give a speech about Jesus and the Good Samaritan, about being a helpful human being. So here's what we have. We have them doing, we're having them do their speech. Sorry, I lost my place. So we have their speech, but for some of them, let's say we told them that the speech was going to be at 2 o'clock. And for some of them, we let them believe that and do it at 2 o'clock. But others, let's say at noon, we get a fake phone call and we look at them and say, oh my gosh, we got the timing right. You need to get across campus. It's already started. They're there waiting for you. Okay. Now, in this Good Samaritan situation, this is where priests and everyone are learning to be good human beings, helpful human beings. They're going to go give a speech on being a helpful Good Samaritan. So they run across campus. But right here, we set up a person who looks like they're in distress. Maybe they're having a heart attack, they faint, they look very sickly. The question is in this situation, should the person stop and help the person in need, a Good Samaritan, or go and give their speech? And sadly, everyone, 89% went and gave their speech instead of stopping and helping the person in distress. Even the ones who had all the time in the world to go across the campus, 60% went and did their speech. Even though they had plenty of time, 60% went and did their speech instead of stopping and helping the human being in distress. Okay. Again, so when we talk about things like belief systems and everything else, and I'll get off this definition, and what I'm trying to aim with this section in the class, sometimes our beliefs and our values and who we think we are as a good, decent human being, when the social situation is right, all of that can go out the window. All of it can be completely forgotten about. And that's kind of what I'm trying to hope to show with this section. But also, I want you to think about, again, we're such a social being that we will do things that are against our own self-interest. And so that's kind of where we're going for with this lecture. And there's three themes that we should note that can really influence behavior. Okay. The first theme that we've come up with in social psychology is group influence and power of a group matter. That that we can get. I'll give this example. No, I'll get to this example later. Okay. The other thing is that while yes, we are influenced by our social world, our own subjective experience matters. As Philip Zimbardo stated, when you want to know about human behavior, when you want to know about mental life, you have to think about this as a play. A person on a stage brings in their manuscript, they bring in their what they've learned, they are the actor on the stage. But if you stop at the actor on the stage, you don't get the bigger picture, because what is also influencing that person is the co-actors, the stage setting, who built that stage, who is the audience watching, who wrote the manuscript, who. And so when you just stop at the individual actor, we miss the bigger picture. And that, but that individual, what the individual brings to the situation still matters and is still very important. Okay. The other thing is small manipulations can have large influences on behavior. This is why I brought up the Carter 2018 moral identity research about how just simply reading something that has nothing to do with morals, or reading something that dealt with moral behavior, influenced cheating behavior. Just simple little tiny manipulations within our social circle, within our social life, can influence behavior. Okay. So, as Turner in 1982 put it, we are concerned here with group membership as a psychological and not a formal institutional state, which, with the subjective sense of togetherness, we-ness, and belongingness, which indicates the formation of a psychological group. Okay. And I'll just bring this up as to kind of emphasize Turner's point. There's no such thing as a Republican or a Democrat. There's no such thing as a southern or northern border. Theoretically, there's no such thing as a government or a constitution. It is something that we make a reality in order for us to understand our collective being with each other. But all of these things, all of these human things, government, churches, schools, societies, borders, are all fictions. They don't exist in reality. They things that we build in our minds to make it so that we can have an understanding or an existence or a part in this very complex world we live in. Okay. All right. Off the sandbox, as you would say. All right. So some theoretical orientations that I want you to kind of understand is that the one major theoretical thing that social psychology has brought to our understanding of psychology is what's called situationalism. Okay, this is a scientific belief in that that the context is significant. The context where you're at influences your behavior. Again, the most basic example of this, and I've used this since the beginning of our class, is if we were in a live classroom and you were the student, you'd go sit at a desk and you would be there. Whereas me as the instructor would come up front and either be at a podium or something like that. But none of us come into that situation and try to guess whether someone should be at the podium or someone shouldn't. It's dependent upon the role we're playing in the situational context. Now, outside of the classroom, um, let's say uh, uh, maybe one of my students is a waitress, In that situation, when I walk into the restaurant, I sit at the table and they stand and provide a service. No reason or why, it's just based on the situation, if that makes sense. Some other kind of theories, things like field theory. This is when we'll talk about things like life space. Why are some people need to be very physically close versus very distance from other people to feel comfortable? And we'll get to Kurt Lewin's World War II organ meat studies a little bit later. It's kind of interesting to talk about, but we'll talk about it a little bit later as we move along. But these are some of the theories. So what we should talk about again, because I've been talking about it a lot, is what is social influence? And if we were to give it a definition, social influence is a myriad of ways that people impact one another, including changes in things like attitudes, beliefs, feelings, and behaviors that result from comments, actions, or the mere presence of others. Okay. And I'll bring up my best example of social influence. When I'm at my home or when I'm at the college, I consider myself Dr. Curtis Peterson. I can do these lectures. I can come in and talk about psychology. But when I go back home, back in Idaho and Montana and stuff, I'm little brother Curtis. And if you were to ask my wife when she's went up and visited our family, she sees some very big changes in me. She hears the change in my voice. She hears the change in my mannerisms because in that situation, I don't feel like Dr. Curtis Peterson. I feel like little brother Curtis. And I speak differently. I'm first generation, so in my family, the speech is very what is a term? Redneck. And I speak very redneck when I go back home, which is good, which is not a judgment call, but it's a different situation. And so this is what we're meaning by the social influence of the situation, how others around us can change our behaviors. Okay. So we're going to start with this question. You don't need to put it in the chat or anything like that, but I just want you to reflect on this. Would you cuddle with and then shock a cute little puppy dog with 450 volts of electricity? So we have this cute dog, you pet him, you do these things, and then you put him in an electrical device and just shock him. How many in here do you think would do that? Well, let's find out. Let's find out how many we would. So this goes back to the question that we asked at the beginning of the semester, the nature of human beings. Are we aggressive, violent, and self-interested? Or are we sociable, attached, affectionate, and companion? And I told you guys we would get to this, and we're going to explore this through these next examples. So I do want to just put this because I am going to talk a lot about the evil things humans can do. But I want to start with this very basic premise. We're not good or evil, but depending upon the situation, we can either do good or evil because we all want these basic needs met. We want to belong. We want to feel like we have a place. We also want to feel like we're in control and that the world, I have say in what happens in my life, in our world. And I want to understand. I want to be able to have people in my life that when I have a problem, I can go to, and they could give me some type of understanding about what I'm going through. I often talk about this in the guise of lectures I give in class. My wife laughs at this one all the time, but I want you again to imagine we're in a class. And all of a sudden, in the middle of this lecture, I jump on top of the table. Hopefully, it's a very secure because I'm a big guy, and I just start wildly dancing. I would be willing to bet if I had cameras on you, the first thing would not be surprise in your face. No, if I were to record you, all of your heads would move to the left and then move to the right. And then you would start displaying emotions of what the hell is going on. And you'll start looking at each other. Some of you will shake your head, some of you will da da da. But what are we doing when we're doing understand? We're looking at other people to see if our reactions to this uncommon situation is right or wrong. Are we experiencing the same thing? Or is something off here? Well, what's going on? And that's what we do when we want the need for understanding. Okay. We also have some self-esteem needs when it comes to our social world. We all want to feel like we worthy and belong. So we look for enhancement. We look at people to say, hey, good job. Or if you did a really crappy job, to call us on it, but help us improve. Right. And so we look to others to see if we are a worthy person. The other thing that we all strive for in this fight between good and evil is the need to trust. Okay. And I'm not talking about trust in the context of some intimate relationship where you could go to someone, they can help you, and they know you'll help them out. That's what I'm meaning by this type of trust. This type of trust is, do I see others as benign? Do I see other people around me and in my surroundings as not harming me? Okay. Now, this is a powerful one to get people to do good or evil. Okay. Because probably in the toolbox of a lot of politicians, if they start to lose a campaign because they're trying to do the positive role, a lot of times what they start doing is what's called fear mongering. Okay, so you probably have heard that Mexicans are coming across the border and raping our kids and shoving drugs down everyone's throats and all that kind of stuff, even though 90% of violence is created by citizens of the United States. And if we were to close the border, it would only reduce violence and drug use by 1.5%. This idea that these people are not benign and I need to go to this leader to take care of me, to make me feel trust. That's what we call fear mongering. Okay. And please, I only use this example because it's a current political one. Both sides do it. So don't think I'm just picking on the Republicans. Democrats do it as well. And so please, I'm not trying to make a political statement, but I'm just trying to use an example of how we all need trust and how it could guide us to either do good or bad, despite the facts. Okay. All right. So evil then, if we were to put this, if we were to define it, evil and violence is not a disease of the mind, okay, or individuals, but a disease of the situation, community, and society which person is situationally based in, okay. And so we're going to go with this premise because what we're going to see is most violence and everything else is based upon the situation, and the power difference in the situation predicts violence and evil much more than dispositional traits or drugs and alcohol. That for generations, we have focused on the individual, that the individual is evil, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't reduced violence at all. But when we start looking at violence as a public health issue, that's when we start to really reduce these types of things going on in our communities. And that's kind of where we're going to head with this. So I'm going to skip that. So I want to get into social influence, and we'll end with this right here. So social influence, again, is the myriad of ways that impact another individual's change in attitude, beliefs, and whatnot. We've defined this already. And there's three types of influence. There's conformity, which is changing one's behavior or belief in response to an explicit or implicit pressure. Compliance is responding favorable to a request of another person. So conformity is the classroom example, where students sit at the desk, the teacher sits at the podium. Compliance is when you agree with your partner that you'll have pizza tonight because they want pizza. Okay. Obedience, though, is when there's an unequal power relationship between two individuals, and one, because they have less power than the other, submits to the demands of that individual. So, as I mentioned, there's a couple famous studies that have been replicated and have shown these three types of compliance. The first one is what's called the Sharif studies. And we're actually going to talk a lot about Sharif either Tuesday or Wednesday when we get to the robber cave experiments with young boys. But this is one of the first studies of social influence. Okay, so we put you in a dark room, and this is kind of a cool thing if you ever want to see. We put a fixed beam of light on a wall. Okay, it's stationary. But because of what's known as the autokinetic effect and how our eyes have to adjust the neurons in the eye, that little light that is actually stationary will start moving back and forth. Okay. The interesting thing is, as humans, we all experience this differently. So some of us may only experience centimeters or inches of it moving. Some of us might experience it at 6 inches to 12 inches and it'll move. We know that if we measure this correctly, we all experience the movement of the fixed light differently. Okay. But what Sharif found is that depended upon whether you were there alone reporting what you experienced, or if you heard someone else say what they experienced, influences what you say. So when someone else is there, they tended to agree with the person who said they moved it, they saw it only move an inch or 2 inches. And conformity became much, much more cohesive dependent on the number of informants. Okay. Now this is kind of an ambiguous thing. And so this led to then later on, probably and if you've heard of this, is the famous ASH studies. Okay. The ASH studies is when we had these two comparison cards. We had a standard line and we had a comparison line. And as you can see, if we were in the experiment and said what line matches with the standard line, I'm hoping you all see this, but it would be line 2. Okay, but this is what Ash did, is he had some Confederates working for him, and he had anywhere from 3 to about 7. The only real participant in the experiment was the individual that came in and sat at the end of the table in this kind of standard line. Okay. And what Ash would do is, on some trials, the Confederates that were working for him would give the right answers or the wrong answers. So in this, maybe all 7 Confederates say, no, it's line 3 is the correct line. And what Ash wanted to know is, even though this is an objective thing, how many people would agree with the group, even though they're giving the obviously wrong answer. Okay. And let's look at the results. The results is that actually 75% of participants initially agreed with Confederates, or the people working for the experimenter. 75% would give the obviously wrong answer on the first run. Okay. But after Ash said, no, 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 you guys are wrong, it's line 2, not line 3, then it went down to 37%. But I want you to think about this. Even though the answer was wrong, the experimenter said the answer was wrong, 1/3 of people would still argue with Ash that the group's perception was correct. I want to repeat this for you because it's going to get to another interesting topic. 1/3 of people, even though Ash said you were wrong, and even if the other Confederates go, oh, I think we were wrong, and he proves it, 1/3 of people could not let go that group was wrong. Okay. This comes down to another interesting topic of what we call extremism. Within any group, even if that group is completely weird, or what we would call cults, okay, there will always be 1/3 of them that will take the extremist stance and completely believe in that group. Okay, so that is what we call extremism. And what Ash studies did is it quantified what we actually see in the real world. Is about 1/3 of Muslims, there's extremist Muslims. 1/3 of Christians tend to have an extreme Christian view. 1/3 of atheists, 1/3 of any group, Republican, Democrat, extreme liberals, extreme conservatives, 1/3 of the entire group. Okay, so what Ash was just doing here is everyone, 75%, if you go and you listen to a seminar, about 75% of people will go, oh yeah, that does make sense, even though it makes no sense whatsoever. But 1/3 of those people will become extreme followers. Okay, so that's kind of what the Ash studies was quantifying. Okay. And he did find that there was things that increased conformity. So unanimity of the group. It was easier for participants not to conform if there was at least one other person that disagreed. Mode of response. More participants disagreed when judgments were given by secret ballot than when had to state it out loud. This is why, again, I'll use religion as an example. This is why the Mormons on every first Sunday, they have testimonies. This is why when someone in the Pentecostal religion is having a religious moment, it's social, it's loud, it's there. Because saying it quietly, you might say, well, that's bullshit. Okay. Not that it is, I'm just saying this is why groups have you do things outwardly and publicly. And there's good things for this as well. And I don't want you guys to get me wrong. If you think about addiction, many of the successful rehab programs make you publicly state that you're an addict. Most good weight loss programs encourage their participants to publicly acknowledge that they're on a diet. So I don't want you to think I'm being negative about how this happens. This is a common thing. Other thing is a status. Greater conformity was shown by participants of lower status than other group members. So if people had more perceived pressure, for example, in ASH studies, if the Confederates were graduate students and the participant was a bachelor students in that situations tended to conform to the group more often. Okay. And this is what we're going to leave for tomorrow. So we're going to leave this topic with the Milgram studies, and we'll find out how many of us would light someone up with 450 volts, but we'll also find out how many of us would shock that poor little puppy dog. But we're going to save that for tomorrow. I'm, I'm going to stop sharing right here, and I'm going to stop